This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Mint Mobile. Stay tuned for a special offer at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Wednesday, July 19th, 2023, and I have the most excellent, the bestest ever, Carolina Milanese here with me for this podcast. Hi, Carolina. How are you?
Hi, Miriam. I'm very well. How are you?
As you can tell, I am okay, but I'm very excited that you're here because you're kind of like the voice of reason. You always bring such a great perspective to things on the show. And you know, it's such a kind of news poor week, honestly. I was hoping there'd be like something's going to happen that's exciting. So yeah, we've got a bunch of, mostly leaks and rumors. I think it's the lull before Korea, before the mad announcement. I will be there next week. Are you going to be in Korea?
I am, yes.
Are we going to see each other? Oh my God, awesome. Great. Well, that's exciting news.
Yes.
Yeah. So, ahead of that, obviously, there's a Samsung section here, which deals with some leaks and rumors. A lot of what I'm curious about to get from you is, where do you think Samsung's going, considering they've received quite a bit of competition, especially in other markets than the US?
Yeah.
And even in the US, like we've seen Moto, right? The Razr Plus on the flip end of things. And how do you think they're kind of reacting, I guess? Because they obviously didn't know this was coming. And they've been planning, they have a long-term plan. It takes 2-3 years to make a phone. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on like what the competition landscape looks like now, both US and global. And then also, pricing and things. Like I really feel strongly that what Moto did with the regular Razr, the one that hasn't been released in North America yet, is the right approach for this kind of product, is the way we democratize the flip phone. The folding flip phone. And so I'm kind of wondering where you see the industry going with that. So yeah, let's talk about all that.
Yeah, there's a lot. So first of all, it's interesting that we saw last night, East Coast time, TM wrote his usual blog pre-Unpacked, where basically is just confirming that it's going to be foldable, and then there's going to be a watch or two or whatever, and then a tablet, right? So it comes out now as being, I think it's been a year and a half, almost 2 years, where he does that on a regular basis to set expectation. And also, I feel like he tries to guide a little bit where the expectation should be from a show perspective, right? And there wasn't really anything earth-shattering in what he said, other than pointing to the fact that innovation is focused around people. And so, they want to make sure that whatever they bring to market is focused around what people want and the way that people want to use a device, which, it should be, right? So that's kind of a good thing. But he didn't really talk about innovation or anything specific that makes me believe that the products are probably iterative, right? Is going to be continuing to perfect a formula that is kind of working for them, right? There's two parts of the market that they're addressing: the very high end, more kind of productivity focused users that also seem to also have a higher disposable income, to your point about pricing, for the fold. And then you have the flip, that is your mass market device. Now, you bring up competition. I don't know that Samsung is changing the playbook, to be honest with you, because of competition. Even if they didn't have the details of what was coming, they knew that Motorola was going to have something. And obviously, internationally, they have more competition from Chinese brands like Oppo. In the US, is pretty still their market, especially when it comes to the larger device. And so I think we'll see kind of more of the same, and less focus on having to convince consumers about how reliable these devices are. We moved on. I think that it's now a question of whether you want to stand out and you gravitate more towards the flip, or you're really looking at 1 in 2 device, so a tablet, phone type device, and you gravitate more around the fold.
But price-wise, they must know that they can't stay at $999 forever on that flip, right? I don't see them going up from there for us in North America. But obviously, there's some talk of the prices being higher in Europe. Inflation is a thing. Taxes are a thing. I'm not too worried about other markets right now. But I'm looking at the North American market, and I'm thinking to myself, it's very likely Moto's affordable phone will be $699. And if that's the case, do you think they'll just continue selling the Z Flip 4 then? Because that would be the solution. Because it's still a Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1, which is perfectly viable, right?
Yeah. That's usually their strategy, right? So in the new devices, they tend, if they can, hold price and give you more. So a better camera, more storage, these kind of things. And then they keep the -1 device in market at a lower price point. I think we are at the point now, the first couple of generations, I don't think that would have worked because there were still some compromises, right? As far as the device itself, that as a user, especially if you weren't convinced that that was the right buy for you, you maybe didn't want to make. Now we're at a point where the devices that are currently in the market are very good devices. So keeping the current generation in market at a lower price point will help them get a bigger, market. It'd be interesting to see because I also still feel that they want to be in the higher end of that market. We need to remember that this is not the main lineup, right? So they have other ways to get to consumers. So it will depend on how badly, I guess, Samsung wants to make that foldable market.
Yeah, and I feel like maybe they don't. And I think maybe that's driven by the relentless deals and trade-ins and things that we've had historically in North America, and the fact that people still walk into a Verizon store and buy a phone on installment, contrary to other markets. So I'm wondering if that's why they're like, whatever, we don't need to go cheaper. And if we have to, we can, pull the Z Flip 4 out again. Like they've done in other cases, like there's S21 Fan Edition. What, 2
Correct.
years old phone is now on sale again in India, which is like, what? And we're talking Snapdragon 888 here, right? Or something like that. So I think that's kind of why I guess secretly I was hoping they were going to make a newer, cheaper model from scratch, that they weren't going to recycle the Z Flip 4, if they indeed even do that,
I think it's a little bit too early, though, Miriam. I think that, the market, I don't know that price-sensitive consumers are ready yet.
Right.
I think maybe next year you'll see that where you'll have a, good, better, and better, whatever the thing is, best and better, but or whatever. I need more coffee, man. But yeah, I do think that is maybe, thank you, is maybe a little bit too early.
Yeah. So you think basically Motorola is a little ahead of itself?
I think Motorola is being smart about knowing their target market, which is a little bit more price sensitive than Samsung. They're being smart at making choices that are region specific. So the fact that, that cheaper model is not necessarily coming to the US is a good choice from their side. And maybe because they are also, trying a bit more aggressively to build that market for themselves.
Yeah. I kind of feel like, I think Moto actually launched the cheaper Razr in India already. I think I remember seeing pricing. So maybe it's not quite launched, but pricing's been announced and it's very competitive. That's why I think the $699 mark is definitely feasible if they launch it in the US. But they briefed us about it. So why would they brief us and not launch it, right? Like, I'm pretty sure Moto is going to launch this thing.
I mean, I hope so from a carrier perspective, right? Sometimes that's the only reason why things don't happen, even if we know that they're supposed to, right? It depends on what the carriers actually want, and also how much the carrier themselves are willing to help in making that market, anything from advertising to retail presence to all of that good stuff that is going to help consumers see the product.
Yeah, you're right. There is a lot of that too, because the carriers are so powerful in this game still, especially on our market, right?
Absolutely.
But the other thing that came up with these two links that I'm going to put in the show notes here for the audience that kind of spawned this discussion and me asking Carolina about it is basically that we saw a Z Flip teaser video. This is kind of an official thing. And it's very well produced. I'm kind of digging the marketing there. It's actually better, in my opinion, that some of the things. I always feel like Samsung's marketing is off to the side somewhere in the weeds and doesn't really work well and kind of hit the nail on the head for our markets, the Western markets. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And it's funny. They've kind of kept that Korean taste, right, to their marketing, which is great, but also kind of cringy at times. But this one, I was like, oh, this is fun. This kind of reminds me of the iPod earbuds early days, of the colorful ads that Apple had that were like with the silhouettes, right? But at the same time, the other leak is about the dummies for the Fold 5 that I've leaked, and it looks exactly the same. And have you seen what's going on in China, especially with the fold phones, the book style folding phones? Like the variety of choices, the fact that last week Honor announced the Magic V2, which is I think 4.3 millimeters thick when unfolded and 9.9 millimeters thick when folded, and weighs less than an iPhone 14 Pro Max. Like you've held the Pixel Fold, and that thing you can feel with this phone that you can throw it at your worst enemy and maim them, right? Yet this Honor is really light. So my point is that there is a lot more variety in folding phones in the kind of book category than in the flip category right now.
Yes.
And yet Samsung's just cruising along. Like, do you think they should improve things? Like, should it fold flat? Should it be thinner? Should it keep that weird aspect ratio of theirs? Are they getting left behind once these other companies come to market, like OnePlus, like Pixel, right?
Well, first of all, I would say that I would never expect Samsung to be left behind, because if there's one thing that they're very good at is actually catching up with the market. Something that, to be honest, and to their credit, they haven't done in a while, right? They've been ahead of the market, especially from a foldable perspective.
For sure.
So it's interesting because I have the Pixel Fold right here, and I've always, from the very start, when I saw the aspect ratio, I was a fan because I loved the Surface Duo, which this is very reminiscent of, right? And my hands are small, and so this fits better in my hand than the longer Samsung Fold, which always seems to be a little off balance, especially when I open it, just because I have small hands. But other than this, other than deciding on that, making it thinner, plain with glass all around and all of that has risk, right? And I think that, what's the saying? Once bitten, twice shy, or something like that, right? I think that Samsung might still have some PTSD from the first version of the Fold. Yeah. And so, there's two things. One is that Samsung is, and if you're looking at bigger players, is volume. So you need to make sure you get to something in the market that you can actually produce in volume. Right. And I would say that's not something that Pixel has to worry about, right? Not to be mean,
and they're not delivering it either. I've played with enough Pixel Folds. By the way, mine is arriving today, so I'm really excited finally. But I've played with enough of them to be like, this is definitely a first gen product, right? Like, I mean, it's okay.
And I think that's where it is, right? The idea that Samsung is on the 5th generation of these things is tested and done, and I think there is a kind of a good thing in not having technology drive your choices. And Samsung is being guilty in the past to do that. Just because you engineer from an engineering perspective can make it doesn't mean that you should. And I think saying no on the foldable side at the moment is probably the right thing to do. Now, for all I know, they could be testing different form factors and trying to, but you're still convincing people. And we were talking about this just before we went on air, that, they don't necessarily have to convince people that these devices are not going to break within 6 months. And I think that that's very important. When you're trying to go from early adopter to mass market, that is absolutely critical. So rather than bringing to market something that is a new form factor and might have a risk, I think they're good at doing what they're doing. And I think they're okay if, for this year is iterative instead of being, another revolution.
I guess I was excited about all the new different form factors and approaches that the Chinese manufacturers have come up with.
Yeah.
And even Google, when the original Oppo Find N came out, which has a passport form factor like the Pixel Fold, I immediately fell in love with that form factor. And that's why I'm obviously also excited about the Pixel Fold, because I'm a Pixel user.
Yeah.
With all the caveats, Tensor being is the biggest caveat here, in my opinion. I'm not too worried about the durability. I'll take good care of it. It's just more like, Tensor, I'm so done with it. But at the same time, I get the software, I get the camera, right? Like this Pixel Fold will probably have, overall, if we ran them all side by side, including all the Chinese makers, maybe Huawei's foldables will have cameras that match the Pixel, but that's about it, right? We know Samsung's not quite up there yet compared to the S series, right?
So, no, correct.
But I'm excited about the Chinese, because when you see what One Honor's doing, weight reduction and thinness is a thing, because I want to be able to use that thing shut and it feel like a regular phone. And that's where these two things come into play. And the fact that they're innovating in that area, reliability is still in the air, of course, but the fact that they're innovating in this area shows that there's room for that to happen, honestly, more aggressively than I expected. I knew we could have weight reduction and thickness, reduction, but I didn't think that to the extent that Honor has on 3 generations now systematically radically improved. And of course, you have Xiaomi, who did something similar with the Mi Mix Fold 2 last year. And the camera systems on Xiaomi's phones have always been a little better than what Samsung's offered on the folding phones. And of course, Huawei does who knows what, because we'll talk about that in a few minutes again. But I feel like this is the thing that I'm a little apprehensive about. It's I know that if I had to recommend a folding book style phone to someone in North America, I'd probably steer them towards a Samsung, simply because overall, Tensor isn't good enough of an experience. It's a product that's been iterated on by Samsung for 5 generations, so it's going to be more reliable, for sure. But if I had a choice, for me, the ideal book style folding phone is a passport format, thin, light, good cameras, and I'm willing to be a little bit less picky about, durability, frankly. The reality is, Theo got a Z Flip 3 about a year and a half ago, just actually before the Z Flip 4. We knew the prices were going to drop, so we got one. And they're using it as their second phone in Canada. And they hate it because it's Android, but they love it because of the form factor. And they already went through 1 screen protector replacement. And this is an average person who uses their phone all the time, plays games on it. And that concerned me, because I was like, wow. Now, of course, it's a Flip 3, so we have 2 generations now since then. But I'm a little apprehensive about that. It's fine, but the fact that you have to go into a Samsung store, and there's not that many of them, or ship it in to get this $19 screen protector replacement done, is not something that's mainstream friendly. I'm sorry, right?
Yeah. But you point out is, 2 generations have come, and I think it was actually the generation after that changed the technology that they're using for that screen protector. So, things have improved on that side of things too. But I tend to agree with you, which I think is the reason why I'm saying, as you get into the mass market, durability is going to matter more. And trying to cut corners to come with a cheaper devices might not be the right thing yet. Other than, in building a new product, I mean.
Right.
But, I think that the way that Motorola has done it is very sensible. And so the compromise that you're making is more on the things that you would compromise even with a regular form factor, right? When you go down in price, is the camera, is the memory, is the chipset.
And I think that's a valid compromise. Because if you look at those specs, they're still perfectly fine. Even at $699, I think they're perfectly fine. So I think they're doing it right, because at the core, it's the same chassis, it's the same hinge, it's the same display.
Right. So nothing is compromised from a durability perspective.
The refresh rate is lower simply because the chip can't drive the high refresh rate. It's not because the display can't do it. I think they're very smart. That's why I was like, if Moto's doing this, clearly Samsung must have something up their sleeve. And from the leaks and rumors, it doesn't look like we're getting 2 flip phones. They might surprise us though. And again, as you said, the Z Flip 4 is definitely still a very valid option.
I don't see why they would take that off the market, to be honest.
I mean, Apple's done this so many times now.
Yeah.
Can you still buy an iPhone 12? I think you can.
I don't think you can the 12.
13 though.
Yes, 13.
For sure.
Yes.
So the point is, Apple's done this. Samsung, I think, has done this too.
Samsung has done it. Yeah,
with the S series, right?
Yep, absolutely. And that has worked wonders for them as far as market share.
So speaking of S series, related to all this talk of next week's announcements that I think I'm kind of excited about, even though it's iterative. I'm mostly excited about the larger display on the Flip 5. That seems to be the case from the leaks.
Yeah, because I agree.
It'll be interesting to see how they're going to do it. We know they're not going to let you run full apps on there, other than maybe a select few from Google and Samsung. But whereas, Moto lets you go wild. And I still don't think for the average consumer, and this is why I think the Razer Non-Plus is a good idea. I think for the average consumer, you don't want or don't need to have much information on the front display. You just need notifications, time, some widgets. In fact, it could be done better. Theo struggles in using that front screen all the time, half the time because it's designed to be used with Spotify or Samsung's own music player. The widget doesn't work half the time with YouTube Music. It just doesn't do anything. You're like, the widget's up, the music's playing. Why doesn't play pause work? You're like, it's like an Android thing or a Samsung thing, and you're like, how could they not, after 2 years, fix this bug somehow?
I'm curious how Samsung is gonna, if you're looking at the Razer, the cameras blend in to the screen, and I'm curious how Samsung is gonna do that.
From the leaks I've seen, it looks like they're doing a bit of a cutout, and not cut through, but the equivalent of the notch on the iPhone, right?
Correct.
And honestly, that's interesting, but. Look, I want to see, this is the thing that's the biggest question mark for me right now, is how Samsung going to do this, and are they going to break any new ground that we don't expect? Something that's not widgets like the Z Flips so far, something that's not full screen apps like Moto. Maybe they'll come up with something completely different. And if they do, then I'll actually be more excited, to be honest with you, because I feel like this is still up for debate. Even for myself, I love my Razer Plus. I've got the magenta one as well. I use it all the time. It's one of the best flip phones I've ever owned. I don't own it, but I've used. And, it's just half the time I'm like, this is great. And half the time I'm like, this is so frustrating. I don't really need all this information on my front screen. You know what I'm saying? I'm still not convinced myself, even though my initial thought as a nerd was like, oh my God, yes, of course you do that, right? Yeah.
I always thought that the front screen should be your wearable device, right? Is what allows you to get what you need without being sucked into the phone once you open it. That's how I think about it, right?
But where'd you draw the line, right?
I
You've seen
know.
this, like with Oppo, we all complained the screen's big, but look, you can do nothing with it. Half the time there's like white space and it tells you to open the phone to do something. You're like, why
See,
did you
and
waste
this
that
is
space?
exactly right. And I think that that's where, for me, music, yes, maps, yes, notifications, yes. Triaging email, maybe,
Right.
just a list to see it, like the subject line, if I need to open this thing and actually reply or not. So I
Yeah.
think that's really more, but at the end of the day, and you bring up the apps and how they show up, and this is some of the, in my opinion, the limitations on the larger fold is apps, right? Is developers that are still not convinced this is going to be a market that is going to be worthwhile for them to invest. And so, you don't really do things much different than you do on a regular device, and that's a shame. And I think that that's where we need a little bit more innovation from an application perspective, so that having all that real estate actually makes a difference.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can't wait for a Chinese phone maker to make a flip folding phone where the front and back have a display, like when it's shut. You know, like go crazy, do what Moto did, but do it in the back as well. So, now you have an entire screen all the time. The only thing that doesn't have a screen is the hinge, and you can use that in any way you want. And someone's going to do that at some point. It'll be fun. But we were just about to talk about the S series, and the reason I brought that up is because the third item that I found in the rumor mill out there is about this S23 FE. And there've been rumors on and off. I've had a couple of guests on the last few weeks where we discussed these rumors, and I'm a little confounded by this rumor because so far my take on this phone is back when the original S20 Fan Edition came out, it made a lot of sense. Samsung was basically out OnePlusing OnePlus, basically playing their game of taking an S series phone, like a flagship, and just squeezing it down price point wise to a place where it's like the best possible value, but it's not an A series, so you're not giving up too much. And then, we got the S21 FE, and it just didn't seem to hit quite as well in terms of pricing and specs. And then nothing for S22. And now we're hearing these rumors of this S23 FE. And the market's changed so much. You can buy an S23 base model now on discount through a carrier for so little that it doesn't seem to make sense to create a fan edition based on what we know a fan edition should be. And so my take so far has been, I don't know why they're doing this. And then I read this rumor of a Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. Notice, not an 8 Plus Gen 1, an 8 Gen 1, which, sorry, Qualcomm, is definitely one of the worst chips you've made in recent history in terms of efficiency. And so why? Why does this exist, Carolina? What are they doing here?
I think the intention was to give you. So we were talking earlier about how the -1 version of the phones always work for them, but as a consumer, if you buy a year-old device, and all your friends will know that you can't afford the current one, right? Either you can't afford it or you don't want to necessarily spend that kind of money. So if you are someone that is limited in budget, but doesn't want to come across as cheap, having DFE allows you to do that, right? Is a little bit like the iPhone SE on the other side, right, of the camp. Right. Has some differences as far as size, and then the major thing is the price. But I think we are at the time now where giving your device that is 2 years old from a chipset perspective does start to feel limiting, especially because these people are hanging on to these devices for longer, right? So it's not now when you buy it, is in 2-3 years time that is going to start to feel, right? And so I think that getting the Fan Edition out with a more recent chipset is the solution around that.
Yeah, I feel like if they position this as, hey, look, you can buy an S23 at a really decent price now because it's been out for a while, but we're going to make a larger S23 for you with I imagine would be better to have an 8 Plus Gen 1 on here. And it's still going to be better than any A series we make, but it's going to be priced similarly to a discounted S23. Yet you get a bigger screen and you sacrifice a little bit on the processor, but overall for fans, that's going to be perfect. If they market it like that, that makes sense. But with an 8 Gen 1, I'm like, that is, and we know that in the rest of the world, that phone's going to have an Exynos 2200, which, oh boy, don't get me started. So that's not really a fan move in my opinion, but yeah, I'm a little confused by this one. Because I mean, of course, Samsung can do anything they want. They have the budget, but like it seems like, considering how poorly received sales-wise, and even by the media, how lukewarm the S21 FE was, the S20 FE was such a success. It hit just at the right time. COVID just started. People were just not sure about anything. They finally could get a phone that was essentially an S20, and they delivered that during COVID because that was what the market was. The uncertainty of the market made that viable.
Yeah.
But today I'm kind of questioning it,
I think some of it as well is that for me, the Fan Edition is for people that don't want to go down to the A series. Right, which matters more in other markets than it does in North America and, markets like the UK that is very skewed towards the high end. And so is that idea of, okay, you're still getting a Galaxy S, not an A, but that's where you are.
Yeah, I guess we'll see how they position it. And maybe we're wrong. Maybe this rumor was mistaken and it's an 8 Plus Gen 1, in which case, yeah, I think it's going to be a very viable product because we've seen how much cheaper the 8 Plus Gen 1 is. At least, I don't know the BOM, right? The bill of materials, but judging from Nothing's approach with the Phone 2, clearly they saved a lot of money by having the 8 Plus Gen 1 versus the 8 Gen 2, right? So I think that might be viable right there. So let's see how it goes. Speaking of Nothing and Calpe and rewinding the clock, brings us to OnePlus, and the next two links I have here for the audience are about OnePlus, specifically around the folding phone, which is supposedly now called the OnePlus Open. I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. And then, of course, the OnePlus 12. So again, leaks and rumors here. The PSA here is at August 29th, it looks like, the launch for the folding phone. So if you're listening, folks, mark your calendars for that date. Obviously, whatever OnePlus is doing, I'll be a part of in terms of media coverage. So just keep an ear out for that. Personally, Carolina, I'm super excited about OnePlus folding phone because I can immediately see it as an alternative to the Pixel right from the get-go, right? Like this is not going to be a Samsung Z Fold 5 competitor directly because Oppo, parent company of OnePlus, has done the Find N and the Find N2, which are passport format, right? Yeah. So as such, I think that this is probably more likely to be a passport format or a different format than the Fold, maybe just a regular looking phone like the Xiaomi's are. They basically, when they're shut, they look like normal 6.7 inch phones, right? So I'm kind of curious what your take is on OnePlus because they kind of took a beating for a couple of years there. And I think with the OnePlus 11, they kind of came back a little bit. The only thing that I feel like was amiss on that phone was the lack of wireless charging, which for our markets, for the West, are kind of a table stake feature at this price point. And this, when you position this as a flagship. So what do you think?
Well, I'm still confused, to be honest with you, from a brand perspective as to where they want to go. I think, you're referring to the beating that they take. I think if they were trying to be too many things to too many people, right, at once. And if going with a Fold is almost kind of taking them back to their core market, which was early adopters, people that love Android, but also love standing out from the market of Samsung users, right? Frankly, and so I think that would be good for them. Their quality is always good, so I don't have any questions. But I think you're spot on as far as putting it as an alternative to the Pixel Fold. And it'll be interesting to see here in North America if the carriers are going to be receptive to it, or if they're going to be, if OnePlus is going to be left basically with online channel, and that would make it more difficult.
I mean, the OnePlus 11 never came to the carriers officially.
Yeah.
So it's a little dicey there. And that's I was really surprised by that. I felt that at least T-Mobile would still do it, but they've even lost T-Mobile, it seems. And wow, that's a big one. I mean, the previous phones weren't that exciting, unfortunately. So I think this folding phone, though, I think you're right, a lot of tech savvy folks are kind of looking forward to this. Obviously, Oppo will do something similar in other markets, right? That's what, it's clear to me, like that we're going to see, there's going to be some sharing here. I don't see them making a completely different folding book style phone at Oppo. And who knows when that's coming. I suppose it'll be called the Fine N3, right? But at the same time, I'm just like, let's see what happens. But I'm excited about this simply because it's clear that we're getting another book style folding phone in North America. And, that's kind of actually amazing because it means that we will have 3 officially sold folding book style and 2 only officially sold flip. I mean, unless you count the second Moto and the older Z Flip 4 if it stays on the market. I'm just saying, like, I'm actually surprised because I would have expected the flip type form factor to take off more and have more choice than that. But for OnePlus's audience, this makes perfect sense that it'd be a book style, right? So my big question here is, will they have wireless charging on this thing? Because if they don't, it'll be really strange. I don't think a lot of people don't need it, right? Don't use it. But once you've used it, you miss it once you don't have it, right? And you're like, I can't remember what phone it was. It was 11. Yeah, when I reviewed the 11, I didn't even realize it didn't have wireless charging. I'm like, all the flagships from OnePlus have had wireless charging lately, except the T series. So I was like, I put it on my charging stand and it didn't do anything. And I was like, no. Are you not? Are you serious? You didn't?
You can't do a foldable phone, though, and not put wireless charging. It's like, here's the greatest.
The best we do, right?
Yes. And it doesn't have this thing.
But a lot of folding phones in China don't have wireless charging. Like even the Oppo, the Flip one, doesn't have it. So
yeah, I guess it's a different market. So I think this boils down to which market matters to them most, right? And I think at the end of the day, I would still see Oppo catering more to China and OnePlus catering more to the US.
I would, but last year when I talked to the execs, they didn't. They're like, we didn't put wireless charging in because it doesn't really matter in China. And I'm like, but China is not really your market. That's what you have Oppo for. Like, why did you? This would have been the differentiator that really would make sense, right? Even if the Chinese people don't use it, like, I don't know. It's just very strange. So that brings us to the OnePlus 12 spec leaks. And this is actually really interesting because this looks like it has everything in the kitchen sink. It's got a folded lens, supposedly a massive 5400 milliamp hour battery. Awesome. Wireless charging at 50 watt in the back and 100 watt charging. All of this is totally not surprising. But my question to you, Carolina, is what's that going to look like price wise? Because the 11, part of what we liked about it, it was like nothing phone 2. It was like Think phone. It was like this, like Pixel 7 and 7a in a way. It was this kind of sweet spot, close to 500, less than 700, kind of like magic, affordable flagship range, right? Yet this, I look at the spec sheet and I'm like, this is a $999 phone.
Yeah.
And so we've seen how badly that ended for them the last few times they did it. And personally, I want that. Personally, I would pay for a OnePlus 12 with a periscope lens and wireless charging and the whole enchilada. I would do that because that is exactly what I want from OnePlus. But I know that it has come back to bite them and that their core audience is more like value focused than I am. So
there's a couple of things. One, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, one of the things that they can do now that they couldn't do, at the beginning from their perspective before they kind of were folded into the Oppo brand is economies of scale, right? And so from a BOM perspective, they might be able to get better BOM because of the economies of scale.
Right.
And so turn that into a saving to the consumer. The other one is going back to the carriers. And so going back to how badly do the carriers in the US want an alternative to Samsung? Because when you're looking at
Not
Android,
very, I believe. Like, that's my thought, you know?
I agree with you from what we're seeing, but I think that, the market is in a different place now. I think, if you're looking at sales, they're continuing to come down. There's little excitement outside of foldables. And there's consumers that are frankly quite happy to get a software update on a hardware that is 2 years old, right?
True.
So, from a carrier perspective, if you want to reinvigorate a little bit of that, you need to go with something different. And, might be a way for them to do that. But I agree with you. I mean, carriers in the US, bless their heart, are not always, thinking in outside the box.
I'm not sure where they're at, because it's just, it seems like America as a country can only think in binaries, everything, two parties, two genders, two carriers. Oh, well, kind of. I mean, three
Kinda.
really, but that's kind of, who knows. And then, of course, two phones, right? Samsung or Apple. And Samsung's Android, Apple's iOS. Like, seriously? Electric cars, gas cars. Like, come on. What is this? It's just very frustrating to me. But it's true. But look, I'm excited about this folding phone. And I'm excited also what I'm seeing in those specs. I'm just kind of questioning if they're realigning their strategy because they're finally understanding that Oppo should be the rest of the world and OnePlus should be the West, right? Which is, I think, where we're going, because Oppo got banned in Germany now, and there's a bunch of things happening. I think then they really should address, the elephant in the room, which is like pricing, value, feature sets to match those markets. And that's why I'm like, where do you think they're going? Because I'm thinking that they're, like, I've talked to, Robin, the CEO of OnePlus North America, a few times since the 11 launch. And I feel like they're kind of getting it here, and they're trying to get Oppo, they're trying to get Pete Lau to get it. And I think Pete doesn't get it. Like, I think I love Pete, but Pete does not get it. And it frustrates me and I think that's part of the reason Carl left to do phone 1 and phone 2, because it's like he got it and it wasn't going anywhere. He did the Nord, which I think was like a brilliant phone, the original Nord, and brilliant value, brilliant, perfectly balanced, kind of like the proto phone, nothing product, right? And then, it just didn't seem to fit into the OnePlus world because there's a whole new brand, right? Like, and they still have it, but now it's very much diluted to kind of like the C in Europe, the N series in North America, and the R series in India and stuff. So yeah, I'm kind of puzzled as to where this is going to go, and I'm hoping they don't mess it up, because I do have a lot of fondness for OnePlus ultimately.
And ultimately, I think they do need to decide who they want to be, right? Are they going to be the high end part of the brand and not just leave Oppo to the rest of the world, but decide, okay, the US on an installment plan is still a high end market. But for that, they need a carrier. And, as we were discussing, maybe, the carriers don't think that is something they need quite yet.
I mean, the fact that the Razr Plus from Moto only didn't go to Verizon blew my mind.
Yeah.
I mean,
considering that they started out with Verizon,
I'm happy to some extent because for years I've been saying you gotta decouple from Verizon because they're literally making your products worse, right? They're literally taking the Edge products and making them terrible. But now you've decoupled, but like, oh my God, that's quite the divorce. Like, what's going on? So my thought was that maybe
but clearly still resentful.
But maybe the Razr 2023 Non-Plus is coming to Verizon as an exclusive. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Because the fact that they have launched it in India and they haven't launched it here yet, we haven't heard a peep, we've seen the phone, tells me they're going to have an unlocked version like they always do, overpriced unlocked, and then they'll have the special Verizon version with millimeter wave and stuff,
It could be, but usually Verizon is the higher end, right? So that would be...
It's true, but look at what they did to the Edge. They never picked the high-end Edges before. The last two Verizon Edge phones were not the Edge Plus, they were the Edge. So maybe they're kind of looking at Moto's success in the G series and going, we want some of that. We don't want to go with the best stuff you make. And look, the Edge Plus, amazing phone. They finally delivered a camera that was very close to the rest of the competition.
Agree.
And that phone does not exist on Verizon.
I know.
That tells you, I think, everything you need to know right there. So speaking of OnePlus, and we talked about nothing, I've already reviewed the phone and discussed it at length on the show, the phone too. I thought I'd ask you your thoughts because there's a software update that this is so funny, Carolina. They announced the phone, my review went live, an hour later, my phone pings and says, there's a software update for you. I'm like, literally, I just reviewed you. Why couldn't you deliver this 2 days ago? And that software update, as you can see, improves the camera and a bunch of other things. I've used it. It's fine. It's making this good phone even slightly better. So, but what's your take on this? Like what Carl's doing here and the fact that he's also not going through the carriers. I mean, it's probably a next year thing for them, if anything, right?
Yeah.
But strange
to be honest
approach.
with you, I'm still scratching my head for a few things. One is the fact that you are going after a market that, when you have price sensitive consumers, you need to hit the basics right. But buying something online is not where these people go.
No.
Right? They want to touch it.
Guarantees it's a niche product. Yeah.
Correct. Because you want to touch it, you want to feel it, you want to make sure that, it feels solid in your hand. And not having that, I think it makes it really hard to go after that price sensitive, price point driven consumer. So I know you're absolutely right that maybe as a next year thing, carriers being carriers, but I don't see them selling in big volume this year.
No, and I don't think that's where they want to be. I kind of feel like, and this is my take, and I don't know how sustainable it is from a business perspective.
Well, that's what it is, right?
Like I'm hoping it's sustainable from business, but I love the idea that Android is starting to stratify into niche products, like the Red Magic 8S Pro that we're about to talk about. It's a gaming phone. It's made by Nubia, ZTE, right? But it's continuously selling every year, every time Qualcomm comes out with a new chip, they come out with a new phone. And you're like, wait a minute, like you're selling them unlocked. Like this has got to be a niche. There's no way you make money on this, but apparently they still do it. So the question is, I want to believe this is possible, but do you as an analyst think it's really possible to have this world of Android that's driven by a few big players and some very well established niche players that are continuing to do really cool things on the side?
It depends if a niche player has the ability to leverage the supply chain in different ways. Otherwise, from a cost perspective, you're either going to be behind so that you are not competing for the latest and greatest technology and you don't have to drive that BOM cost up. Or you're not going to have enough margins to stay in business. We've seen that, people still remember HTC.
Right.
The volumes get to a point where it's just not sustainable.
But I don't think HTC ever tried to be a niche player. It feels to me like Red Magic.
No, they were reduced to be a niche player.
Right. Whereas to me, it seems like Red Magic and Nothing are just trying to be like, hey, we're going to do our own thing. Like if you want an iPhone, but you want Android, buy a Nothing phone too. If you want a gaming phone,
I understand that is, is different in terms of how you're thinking about the product, but the limitations on your margins and BOM are still there, right?
Yeah.
So is how much money do you have behind you that allow you to continue to drive innovation and do the things you do? It's interesting because with the Nothing phone, people are talking about, and this is the other part that plays a role is, there's niche and niche, right? In terms of this is really for somebody who wants to stand out, who really cares about making the phone something that is very personal And I think there are more people like that are gamers, as an example.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Or, or more people like that than people that want a smaller phone. So I think there's niche and niche. And the people for whom, personalization matters are also prepared to pay more. So the question is going to be, does the nothing phone always have to be at that price point, or this is the first one they're convincing you that they can do it and that they can move up in price?
I mean, I think we're starting to see some of that between phone 1 and phone 2, right? And
right.
It could continue, but I feel like Carl is intimately aware of how that ended for OnePlus, right, in North America. So I think he's trying to find the sweet spot, right?
It is, yeah, absolutely. It's about balance.
And I think in that sense, I'm not too worried about what they're doing. But I'm kind of questioning things, like I'm going to skip to the next thing quickly here and go to talk about the Red Magic. Just so you know, folks, we talked about this phone. It was announced last week. It's a minor revision on the 8 Pro that I reviewed in February, available in the US, Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, but this is the binned version that we see on the S23 series, like the higher clock speed on the main core version that essentially is an 8 Plus Gen 2. And in fact, they're calling it an 8 Plus Gen 2, even though Qualcomm hasn't announced that chip officially, as far as I know. So it's the same as the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy, right? Basically. So they're doing that.
Which rolls off your tongue, isn't it?
Yeah, it was fantastic. Oh my God. But the point is, the price point is about the same as before. So it's very competitive, right? We're getting a phone for $650 starting price here with an 8 Gen 2 that has an incredible display. I mean, you read my review, the design is tops. Software is not very good. Cameras are kind of meh, but it's a gaming phone and it does very good at gaming. I've never seen a phone that can maintain the thermal performance that this phone can. Like you can, even with the fan turned off, you can keep 99% ongoing for hours on end on that thermal envelope. It's incredible. Like half of, like the Nothing Phone 2, for example, dropped to 60% after 10 minutes, right, of performance because it can't do this thermals very well. And that's an 8 Plus Gen 1. It's not even the latest chip. So there you go. There's another kind of niche player that somehow, they're driven by a bigger company in China and they sell worldwide. But it's amazing to me that they're persisting in this market. They can be, like, Caroline, they cannot be selling more than 1,000 phones here in the US. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, but to some extent, this is my point earlier. Like, if you have other markets that help you with your economies of scale or other phones that help you with that, then your lift is not impossible to make you stay in business for 1,000 phones a year.
Yeah, for sure. So, what do you make of this news? Huawei to make its own 5G chip.
Oh Lord.
Okay, you go talk. Tell me what you think.
Why? I don't know. It's they've been through it. Unless they need it for China, and they're really concerned.
They do, right? They're the number one. They were the number one phone manufacturer in China. China has an extensive 5G network, and they didn't have a phone with 5G, so I think they have to.
Yeah. But I don't know how it's going to play out when it comes to, and I'm trying to think about the relationship still between the US and China and how in the past they've been able to license ARM because ARM is in the UK. But, and so they kind of got away from that, China versus US. But the UK has also become really tough on anything China. So, it's just, I don't know. I don't know how easy. Bit, right? Yeah, I don't know how easy it's going to be for them to pull this off.
And not to mention, we don't even know if it's going to be any good. I'm sure the yields will be terrible, right? Initially, at least.
Yes.
And I'm sure, even though Huawei does know how to make a 5G chipset perform, they made their own chips with 5G for a while. It's a whole different ballgame when you can't really access some of the technologies that you had access to before, right? So
correct.
I think it's interesting. I think you're right. There's a lot of geopolitical fallout potential here. And also, you never know. Maybe this is what we need for a, a change of fortunes for them. Because I mean, I've used some of their phones since the big ban, and they are still incredible phones in terms of camera and other things. Even with Snapdragon chips that are crippled with only 4G in them, and so I still think Huawei has it. It's just a matter of like, this is maybe a chance for them to, solve a problem that's a Chinese only problem, and maybe the rest of the world won't care.
I personally, that's how I feel. Yeah, I don't think that the rest of the world is going to care.
Yeah.
We have enough alternatives now that we don't, this, when all of this started and you were looking at the footprint that Huawei had in Europe, then yeah, that would have made a difference. But now we have enough alternatives that I don't think that any carrier is going to take the risk, and certainly not consumers.
Oh, I mean, do you really want to put a phone on your network with a 5G chip designed in China?
Correct.
Not by Huawei, because that's the thing, right? I mean, Huawei had some input, but I actually trusted when Huawei was doing their own chipsets more than this. Like, who knows how janky this is going to be, But anyway, one last thing here that I want to kind of get your temperature on is this ongoing smartphone shipment decline.
Yeah.
How do you read this? I mean, I'm not worried about it. Like, I totally understand why. Like, economy is crap.
It's the market.
The phones are kind of settling in
better.
terms of like, they're all really good. So you're keeping them longer, etc. Is this just a continuation of that, or do you see some other unexpected factor here?
No, I mean, we've seen this in the past with cyclical technology, and it's not just the hardware is getting better, the software is getting better, and the vendors are getting better at supporting software, including security updates. So I think is where consumers are. You're getting the camera at the point where you have pretty much everything you need. Even in the high end, to be honest with you, replacing every year is becoming a little bit harder to justify.
It's hard to justify, for sure. I'm still using my Pixel 6 Pro because they're just too lazy to upgrade to the 7 Pro. Even though the 7 Pro is a better phone. But I'm like, it's too much work. I have the 7 Pro in my pocket.
And it's really incremental. I mean, like, we need to be honest, right?
Yeah.
It's like we are pulling hair, splitting hair, whatever it is, to want to justify the newer phone. So I think that's where we are. And I don't think, the economy, yes, plays a role in it. Consumers obviously have been hit hard by the inflation and generally, work and everything else. And they're choosing to spend their money in different ways that are much more critical than not getting a new phone. So,
yeah, it's really nothing new. It's just going to be like this for a little while. And I wonder how long-term it's going to affect the industry, right? Like in terms of innovation and stuff. Because obviously we were kind of driven by a yearly cycle for so long that now I feel like we're more like driven by a bi-yearly, every 2-year cycle.
From an upgrade perspective, I think the cycles are now, so the majority of the markets have been on a 24 to 36 month cycle for a long time. And I wonder if we are getting more and more towards a PC cycle, which has always been 3 to 4 years.
Right.
And we had the big refresh on the PC side during COVID. And now we started to see that, even that market is suffering quite a bit because both from an enterprise perspective and a consumer perspective, people went out, got the greatest and latest, and now they're kind of good for another 3-4 years.
And we're satisfied. We're satisfied customers. I mean, anybody who bought a Mac since the M chip transition, it doesn't need another Mac for probably 5 years at this point, frankly. That's how I feel. So, and I'm a pretty much power user.
But I think that the point about is not just the hardware, is the software as well, is what is going to make this different from, one of the downturns that we've seen in the early 2000 and the mid 2000, because at that point, the software was still developing at a pace that, the discrepancy between the software and the chipset was such that you needed one and the other. And so, one time was the chipset that was getting to upgrade. The other time was going to be the software. So the question for me is, if I look at technology and I look at what's coming down the pipe, the one thing that I think is going to make a difference, especially in the high end, is generative AI. And the consumers will want Gen AI on device. And
at the edge, right?
Like
not necessarily connected. Yeah.
Correct.
That makes sense. And then you start needing some pretty heavy lifting in terms of NPU and neural net and AI processing. Yeah. So that'd be interesting.
So we're talking about 2025.
That makes sense. So the last thing, and I wanted to kind of pick your brain about that because we've only covered Threads once on the podcast the week it was announced, because I was kind of excited about it. Obviously, the honeymoon phase is over. That was not surprising. The quick growth is pretty exciting to me. But I knew it was going to taper down. I'm just more concerned about the whole Europe thing that's happening with Threads, and I mean, they're blocking VPN access. Clearly, they don't want to get in trouble legally here. I get that. But that looks so bad for consumers, right? Like, I think at this point, I know they launched it early because they wanted to capitalize on Twitter's failures, and that was smart. But you're alienating a pretty large chunk of your potential user base here, and you still need to comply. So how do you think they're going to navigate this? What do you think they're doing here? It seems so murky to me.
I think they're being cautious, and that's all there is to it, right? If you start with the fact that, Threads is an Instagram company, not a Meta company, and I know it's stupid because it's all the same, right? But it's just showing that they're very careful in navigating all of this from regulation and, market, a competitive environment. They really don't want to end up in a position that they're going to regret. And so blocking consumers right now in Europe is the right thing to do. Now, it still doesn't explain why a whole bunch of people that I know are based in Europe have an account.
Maybe because they have a US-based account.
I don't think that people have seen. So whether it's just the fact that because they have an Instagram account, they can then but they can't be active on the platform, which would open up a whole can of worms as far as, okay, so how then do you count users? Are you inflating the numbers because of that? And these are not active users because I don't see them being active, right? So it's kind of interesting, but it'll work itself out. And I think right now, to me, this seems like a US-centric interest anyway, at least for now, trying to establish, a strong engagement footprint here in the US from an advertising perspective and all of that, and then see what happens in other markets.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Well, thanks for clarifying that, because it's like, you have a much more kind of overlooked perspective than I do, because this is not something I focus on. But, I have a lot of my audience in Europe, and they're like kind of screaming at me right now. Right? They're like,
that's the big question is, how long is that going to take? Because if you do this for work, like we do, right, it's clear that as much as I want to walk away from Twitter, I can't. Right. Because, the footprint and the exposure I get there compared to what I get on Threads. And if, like you have a big audience based in Europe, then obviously you can't do that till, things change in Europe from a user perspective.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how it goes, I guess.
But it's good to have an alternative.
Yeah, I'm actually curious to see if, as a US account holder, if I travel to Europe, will they block me or not? Like, I'll be interesting to see that. I should Google that and see if people. I'm surely somebody's tried. But it'll be interesting to find out. Well, listen, Carolina, we should wrap up. Do you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet, your various social media handles, on all of it, everything, threads and all?
Yes.
And where they can find some of your writing? I know you do some Forbes stuff from time to time too, right?
Yep. Yeah, I have a column on Forbes where I tend to write about diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainability, and general kind of technology and consumer relationships. I also am on all social media, including LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my name, Carolina Milanesi, but then Threads, TikTok, and Twitter, and YouTube as Caro_Milanesi, Milanesi. You'll also find some of my writing on creative strategies.
Yes. That's your main gig, really.
It is. That's my day job.
As an analyst, and I really love your perspective. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Folks, you know where to find me. I'm at Tank Girl on all the platforms. That's TNKGRL. Just like the comic book character, drop the vowels. That's Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. I am on Mastodon, but I'm not really on Mastodon because I don't know what I'm doing. So don't even look for me there. I'm on Threads, of course, because it's the same handle as Instagram. So, reach out to me and Carolina about this podcast on these platforms if you have access. And, if you want to subscribe to the podcast, it's at mobiletechpodcast.com. We're on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, everywhere good podcasts can be found. And if your app lets you rate or review the show, please consider doing that. My Instagram is full of photos of cars and tech and travel and other gadgets. So check that out, all taken with phones. That's a great way to look at some content. Another bit of content lives on YouTube, but basically I have like some hands-on and unboxing videos. Been a little less active lately because I've been so busy, but keep checking it out. YouTube.com/mobiletechpodcast. You know how YouTube works. So like, subscribe, tell your friends, click the bell, comment about the podcast there if you want as well. And then finally, if you want like the whole story, and you wanted to get it a little earlier and get the bloopers of me getting FedEx packages, just go to Patreon, patreon.com/TankGirl. That's patreon.com/TNKGRL. There's an exclusive video version of the podcast. It comes out a day or two ahead of the free audio version. So if you want to see me and Carolina chat and hold up things, check it out. Also, there is a Discord server you can join. And more importantly, you get to help me financially support this podcast. So consider it. I'd appreciate it. Patreon.com/TNKGRL. Also, if you don't like Patreon and you want to help me out and buy me a cup of coffee like this one from our local brewer, a good way to do that is to use the link for PayPal in the show notes. Just click through and just make a donation. I'd appreciate it. And also, I want to thank our sponsor, Mint Mobile. I review a lot of phones, so I'm constantly juggling multiple devices. While that's fun, it also means I'm spending a lot of money for wireless service on multiple SIMs. Thankfully, there's Mint Mobile, and that's who I'm teaming up with for today's podcast. If you want to save money on your wireless service, switch to Mint Mobile. You've probably seen the Mint Mobile ads featuring Ryan Reynolds, but let me quickly tell you how fantastic their service is, especially for tech-savvy early adopters like us. Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for as low as $15 a month, and you don't have to sacrifice any coverage, speed, or data. They're built on the nation's largest 5G network. They keep costs low because they sell direct to you online. They cut out the retail stores and salespeople. Why should you pay more than you have to for access to the same network? In my experience testing phones, Mint Mobile delivers the same data speeds and call quality as the big three for a fraction of the cost. Switching to Mint is super easy. Thanks to their eSIMs, you can sign up and activate immediately right on your phone from the comfort of your home. No more standing around waiting in line at a big wireless store. You can keep your current devices and phone number and easily switch services. And if your phone isn't eSIM compatible, Mint will ship you a new SIM card free of charge. The whole process only takes 15 minutes, and if you get stuck, Mint has a great customer service team to get you through it. All Mint Mobile plans include unlimited nationwide talk and text, plus lightning-fast 5G and free mobile hotspot. Mint will show you how much data you use each month and recommend plans that save you money. Mint also offers a modern family plan that lets you set up a super affordable family plan with as little as 2 lines. Use my link, mintmobile.com/mobiletech to get premium wireless starting at $15 a month. Stop paying more than you need on your wireless bill and start saving big with Mint Mobile. And I want to thank you, Carolina, for being my guest yet again. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll have you on the podcast at some point again in the future. And folks, we'll have another show next week. So stay tuned for that. Until then, cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.